12 years ago, I bought my first ever camera, and that camera was a Nikon. Shortly after, I got rid of it. I switched to Canon and then Sony and never touched another Nikon since. Until a few weeks ago. After 12 years, I finally got my hands on Nikon's new Z6iii. I took it along to a portrait/branding shoot to test out its overall image quality and autofocusing. I also brought it to the Honda Indy to shoot some fast cars and test out its 120 frames per second burst mode. And while I was doing that, I also tested out its internal RAW video. Because yes, this camera can shoot RAW video internally direct to a card. And this camera does one thing very well, probably better than any other camera I've tested, but we'll talk about what that is a little later on. Before we get into it, Nikon did send me this camera to test out. However, this video isn't sponsored and I don't get to keep any of this gear. This video is sponsored, however, by myself and my ethereal preset pack for portraits. We'll talk about that later on. So the Nikon Z6iii, Z6iii, however you say it, this camera is obviously a massive upgrade since the last Nikon I used 12 years ago. This one is mirrorless. It houses a 24.5 megapixel partially stacked full frame sensor and does some things that other cameras can't do, like shoot photos up to 120 frames per second. Most cameras. And for my video people, it can shoot 6K up to 60 frames per second, raw video, all internally, direct to the card. With those specs alone, this camera is pretty impressive considering it only comes in at $2,500. Now I know $2,500 is still a lot of money for a lot of people. What I am saying is for the features that you're getting in this camera, compared to other cameras like it on the market, it is pretty decent. Now during this cowgirl shoot we did, I was super impressed with how the Nikon performed, and it felt like any other camera. Autofocus was working fast as it should, and I didn't run into any issues where I wished that I had my Sony with me. I did use the new Nikkor 35mm 1.4, which is this lens right here, but I was also using the 85 1.2, this big chonker, and I'm telling you, this was a beast for some of the portraits. Both of these lenses, when paired up with the Z6iii, produce some beautifully sharp images. Basically, all the photos that you've been seeing in this video have been edited with my ethereal preset pack. And whether you shoot on Canon, Sony, Nikon, Fuji, Lumix, I've tested these presets with raw files from all of these systems, so I know that they'll work for you. When I'm editing my photos, I'm all about saving time, and I use my preset pack to do exactly that. So typically a photo takes me 10, 20, even 30 minutes to edit, but utilizing the presets, the built-in tools, and my masking presets built into my ethereal preset pack, I'm able to get that down to just a couple minutes. So if you want to save time editing your photos, go check out my preset pack, link in the description. This preset pack also comes with a 20-minute instructional video explaining how to install and use the presets, as well as things to keep in mind while you're shooting to make the presets work a lot better. The pack also comes with extra tools and masking presets for Lightroom. Now this is actually the first camera I've used with a partially stacked sensor, which Nikon decided to use in the Z6iii to have faster readout speeds, to reduce the rolling shutter, increase the resolution and frame rates when in video. Now it's not going to be as fast as a fully stacked sensor, but this choice is how they were able to keep the price of the Z6iii fairly low. That partially stacked sensor is also how they're able to get those 120 frame per second bursts out of this camera. Now shooting the Honda Indy is something that I've never done before properly, like I mean as media with a media pass and trackside. So I thought bringing a camera like the Z6iii that is capable of shooting 120 frames per second, something my A7 IV can't, was a good idea. Now, one thing that I should note is that Yes, it can shoot up to 120 frames per second, but trying to write 120 images to a card every second at this resolution and file size would just be insane. So with the Z6iii, you can shoot 120 frames per second, but in JPEG and with a crop. Now, before you say, that's dumb, why can't I shoot in RAW? Understand that the people who would actually use the 120 frames per second drive mode, because I know I wouldn't for what I shoot, a lot of them don't need to be shooting in RAW anyway. For example, at the Honda Indy and in sport photography in general, many professional photographers at these events are working for teams, sponsors, or the athletes, or for press and news. A team isn't going to wait a week for that photographer to deliver his images because the race is just no longer relevant by then. Because of this, many of these photographers aren't shooting in RAW, so JPEG just makes sense. Now, while shooting fast cars at the Honda Indy with the Z6iii, it performed great. I was shooting with Nikon 70-200, and I tried to get a variety of different shots. The autofocus performed great, even though I couldn't quite figure out how to get it out of spot focus. There were only a couple times where I experienced the autofocus would hunt or wouldn't lock on fast enough when I wanted it to. I shot around 1,500 photos with some raw video clips in the course of 6 hours, and one battery was enough. Obviously, I was shutting the camera on and off while I wasn't using, but still pretty impressive. I also never experienced any buffering or overheating issues while shooting at those higher drive modes, even though it was like 32 degrees Celsius outside. When it came to video, I didn't do a whole lot of testing, more so just random clips here and there to try out color grading and correcting raw video because it was my first time ever shooting raw video. And I will say it is pretty impressive, especially for changing your white balance and exposure after the fact. That being said, it's a camera and it takes amazing photos just like a lot of other cameras. But the body of this camera is what made me really like it. I personally think the overall quality, build, and feel of this camera is one of the best of any other camera I've used. It is way better than my Sony for grip, feel, ergonomics, and quality. Better than my A7 IV. My FX30 is still like a tank. The grip feels great, the flip out screen feels solid and robust. Honestly, like unreal, along with the SD card door and the battery door, everything just feels very solid and better than my Sony. Now it does have 2 card slots, a CF Express B and a regular SD card slot. For those of you who do want to be able to film internally, raw video internally at those higher burst rates, you do need to be using fast cards like a CF Express, like this one from ProGrade. Now, aside from just comfortability and robust design, the camera also has the brightest EVF currently on a camera at like 4,000 nits, brighter than my laptop, brighter than my phone, giving you a much better experience and ability to see a lot more detail, even when shooting in bright conditions. Now, this bright EVF is wild, but the one thing that Nikon cameras have always done very well is their raw files. Editing the raw photos from this Z6iii were so easy to work with. Bringing back blown highlights, manipulating colors, everything just looked so good and a lot more richer and better than the Sony raw files. Sometimes I find Sony's raw files are just way too flat where it's almost hard to get really rich colors out of it. With the Nikon, just look how rich the colors are in these photos. Shooting with this camera over the past few weeks, I've really come to love it and would honestly consider buying it if I didn't have to rebuy a bunch of my lenses again. If all my glass could seamlessly work with the Z6iii, I'd 100% buy it, even just for its internal raw video. Now, like I mentioned before, it is just a camera. It's 2024. Everyone is making really, really good cameras. So when you are watching my videos and I'm talking about a Nikon and next week I'm talking about a Fujifilm, don't feel pressured like I'm telling you to buy this camera. I honestly just like talking about gear. The things to look out for, what I would be looking out for when buying a camera, are just some of those extra features, like for example, this camera, internal raw recording. those features that other cameras don't have, like my A7 IV. But anyway, that's it. Thank you, Nikon, for letting me test it out. I look forward to testing out some more Nikon stuff in the future. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, make sure to subscribe. And if you want to edit photos like I do very quickly, make sure to check out my ethereal preset pack linked in the description. And I'll see you in the next one. I might just drop a promo code in the comments. So, peace.